Hello, everyone. My name is Jolene. I am 31 years old, and what I am about to share with you is the story of how I lost my biological family, but finally found myself. If you are sitting down with a cup of coffee or folding your laundry, I want you to get comfortable. This is a long journey. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I would love to know where you are watching from today. Now, I need to take you back 17 years. I need to take you back to the day my mother died, the day the ground opened up and swallowed everything I thought I knew about love. My mother, Estelle, died on a cold, damp Tuesday in October. I was only 14 years old. She had been fighting ovarian cancer for 2 agonizing years. I spent my early teenage years doing my algebra homework in uncomfortable vinyl hospital chairs, listening to the steady beep of her heart monitor. By the end, she was so fragile that she weighed less than I did. I remember holding her hand, feeling the thin, papery texture of her skin over her bones. But even in that hospital bed, she never stopped being the strongest, brightest person in the room. My mother was the glue that held our house together. More importantly, she was the only person in our home who treated us the same. If my older sister, Maxine, got a new bicycle for her birthday, I got a new bicycle, too. If Maxine needed help studying for a biology test, my mother sat with her for hours, and then she would turn around and spend just as much time helping me with my history essays. She absolutely did not believe in having favorites. She believed in fairness, deep in her bones. The funeral was a blur of misery. The sky was a heavy, bruised gray, and the grass at the cemetery was completely soaked from an early morning rainstorm. I can still close my eyes and vividly remember the overwhelming, cloying smell of white lilies mixed with the scent of wet mud. My father, Wallace, stood right at the edge of the casket. He had his heavy arm wrapped tightly around Maxine. My sister was 16 at the time, wearing a black dress and dark sunglasses, leaning her entire body weight against him. Wallace pulled Maxine close to his chest. Then, loud enough for all the relatives and friends standing near the grave to hear, he said, "You are the woman of the house now, Maxine. It is just you and me." I stood exactly 3 feet away from them. My black dress shoes were sinking slowly into the wet earth. My hands were shoved deep into my coat pockets, freezing cold. I stared at the side of my father's face, waiting. I kept waiting for him to reach out his other arm. I waited for him to pull me into that huddle, to tell me that we were a family of 3 now and we would survive this together. He never turned his head. He just held Maxine tighter. Nobody said anything to me at the graveside. I felt entirely invisible, like a ghost attending my own mother's burial. But there was one person who saw me. Darlene was my mother's absolute best friend. They had known each other since their early college days. After the funeral service, everyone filed out to go back to our house for the reception. I could not bear to be in that crowded house yet, so I lingered in the back pew of the empty church. Darlene found me there. She walked down the aisle, her heels clicking softly against the stone floor. The smell of her lavender perfume wrapped around me before she even spoke. She crouched down right in front of me, took my freezing hands in her warm ones, and looked me directly in the eyes. Her makeup was slightly smudged from crying, but her voice was as solid as a rock. She said, "Jolene, I promised your mother I would always have your back. Do you remember that?" I nodded slowly, swallowing the thick lump in my throat. At the time, I did not understand the true weight of what she meant. I thought she was just offering the standard comfort adults give to grieving children. What I did not know, what I would not discover for several years, was that my mother, in her final weeks of clarity, had begged Darlene to become my legal godmother. She had actually signed formal, binding paperwork. She had lawyers involved. It was official. When I first learned about it, it seemed like a sweet, sentimental gesture from a dying woman who loved her best friend. It was not. My mother knew something I was too young to see. she knew exactly what Wallace would become without her there to keep his worst impulses in check. And she was right about every single thing she feared. Within a month after the funeral, our house completely split into two different realities. Maxine's world was flooded with privileges. On her 16th birthday, she woke up to a used, bright red Mustang parked in the driveway. It had a big white bow on the hood. She shrieked, hugged Wallace, and immediately drove off with her friends. She had a college fund that Wallace started aggressively topping up on the first of every single month. She took expensive golf lessons at the local country club because Wallace wanted her to network with the children of his wealthy friends. On weekends, they took road trips to tour prestigious university campuses, staying in nice hotels and eating at fancy restaurants. I know this because they would leave me a $20 bill on the kitchen counter for pizza and disappear from Friday evening until Sunday night. Her bedroom got repainted twice in 1 year because she decided she did not like the first shade of blue. My world, on the other hand, was built entirely on leftovers and scraps. I remember a specific Tuesday evening during my sophomore year of high school. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at a printed syllabus for my advanced placement classes. I needed $50 for 2 required textbooks. I walked into the living room. Wallace was sitting in his leather recliner, his eyes glued to a baseball game on the television. I stood beside his chair and quietly asked him for the money for the books. He did not even turn his head. He just kept staring at the screen, took a sip of his beer, and said, "Ask your sister." I already gave her the budget for the month. The budget. He spoke as if there was only one single pool of money in the household, and Maxine simply got to it first. I walked back into the kitchen, my face burning with humiliation. I did not ask Maxine for the money. I already knew she would roll her eyes and tell me she needed it for a new dress. Instead, I set my alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning. I started working at a small, independent coffee shop across town the exact week I turned 16. I worked the opening shifts before school. I would wake up in the pitch dark, put on my apron, and walk in the freezing morning air to turn on the espresso machines. I smelled like roasted coffee beans and sour milk all through my morning classes. But I bought my own notebooks. I bought my own calculator. I even bought my own winter coat when the zipper on my old one completely broke off, and neither my father nor my sister even noticed I was shivering at the breakfast table. The division between Maxine and me became impossible to ignore one particular night during my senior year. I desperately needed to borrow Maxine's Mustang. I had secured a major scholarship interview the next morning at a university across the city. It was an early morning slot, and it was the only real shot I had at affording college without drowning in terrible debt. The city bus routes did not run early enough on the weekends to get me there on time. I swallowed my pride and knocked on her bedroom door. I could hear loud pop music playing inside. I opened the door slightly. She was lying flat on her bed, her legs kicked up, carefully painting her fingernails a bright, glossy red. I asked her if I could borrow the car the next morning, just for 2 hours. I explained exactly what the interview was for and how important it was. She did not even look up from her nails. She just blew on her fingers and said, "I need it." I felt a knot form in my chest. I told her the buses did not run at 6 in the morning. I pleaded with her, just a little. Maxine finally looked up, her expression completely flat and unbothered. "Not my problem, Jolene," she said, and turned the music up louder. I closed her door. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30. I put on my only professional skirt and blouse, laced up my sneakers, and put my dress shoes in my backpack. I walked 2.5 miles in the pitch dark. The street lights were flickering, the wind was biting through my jacket, and I remember clutching my folder of transcripts so tightly my knuckles turned white. I changed my shoes in the bathroom of the university building, splashed cold water on my face, and walked into that interview. I got the scholarship. But here is the truth that burned a hole straight through my heart. I found out later, much later, when Darlene finally helped me pull the old bank records, that my mother had set up a college fund for me, too. It was a trust, and it was exactly equal to the money she had set aside for Maxine. But after my mother died, Wallace found a legal loophole before Darlene could intervene. He quietly transferred every single dollar from my college fund into Maxine's account. Every single penny my mother had saved for my future, he handed to my sister. He did not even wait a full year after the funeral to do it. I graduated from high school on a bright Saturday in June. I graduated summa cum laude. I was the vice president of the National Honor Society. I had secured a full-ride academic scholarship to the state university. That afternoon, while other families were hosting backyard barbecues and taking hundreds of photographs, Wallace took Maxine to a tennis tournament at the country club. I walked across the graduation stage to receive my diploma almost entirely alone. As I stood on the stage, I scanned the massive metal bleachers. I looked past endless rows of proud parents holding bouquets of flowers and shiny balloons. Finally, my eyes found one single, solitary face. It was Darlene. She was sitting in the third row, right on the aisle. She was clapping her hands together so hard her shoulders were shaking, and she had a single, massive sunflower resting in her lap. I smiled at her, and my eyes filled with tears that I refused to let fall. That evening, I went back to the quiet house. I went up to my room and pulled out two large, heavy canvas suitcases that used to belong to my mother. I packed my clothes, my books, and the few photographs I had. I zipped them shut, the sound echoing loudly in the hallway. I dragged the suitcases down the wooden stairs. Bump, bump, bump. Wallace was sitting in the living room, exactly where he always was, watching a sports recap show. The television was loud. I walked right past his chair, dragging the heavy bags behind me. He finally glanced up from the bright screen. He looked at the suitcases, then looked at my face. "You leaving?" he asked. His voice was completely flat. "Yes," I said. He turned his eyes back to the television. "Lock the door on your way out." That was it. There was no hug. There was no "good luck in college." There was no instruction to call him when I arrived so he knew I was safe. There was just an order to secure the house. I walked out the front door, turned the deadbolt until it clicked loudly, and stepped out into my new life. I rented a tiny, cramped room situated directly above a busy laundromat in a college town 40 minutes away. The floorboards of my apartment vibrated constantly from the heavy washing machines tumbling below, and the air always smelled faintly of cheap bleach and hot dryer lint. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. I worked 2 jobs to survive. I worked at a campus coffee shop in the early mornings, and I waited tables at a busy diner at night. In between shifts, I studied. I would sit in the back booths of the diner after my shift ended, using a small flashlight to read my textbooks so I would not bother the night cleaning crew. I slept 4 hours on a good night. My body was constantly exhausted, but my mind was laser-focused. One Sunday morning, Darlene drove up to visit me. She brought a bag of fresh groceries and set them on my tiny, wobbly kitchen table. We sat down across from each other. She opened her purse, pulled out her checkbook, and placed it flat on the table. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and deep sorrow. "Jolene," she said softly. "Your mother left you something with me. She wanted to make sure you were okay. Please, let me use it to help you pay for your rent and your food. You are working yourself to the bone." I stared at the checkbook. I thought about how easy it would be to say yes. To sleep for 8 hours. To buy fresh vegetables instead of eating instant noodles for the 5th time that week. Then, I looked up at Darlene. "I cannot take it, Darlene," I told her. "I need to do this myself. If I take your money now, I will never truly know if I have the strength to stand on my own 2 feet. I have to know I can survive without them." Darlene stared at me for a long moment. She slowly closed the checkbook and slid it back into her purse. She did not argue with me. She did not tell me I was being foolish. She just smiled a sad, gentle smile and said, "You sound exactly like your mother." I kept my head down and worked harder than anyone else in my classes. I secured my real estate license when I was 22 years old. I studied for the exams late into the night, learning the ins and outs of property law, contracts, and negotiations. I made my first major property sale at 23. It was a small starter home, but the commission check felt like $1 million. By the time I was 26, I had built a reputation in the city. I was earning a six-figure salary. I received a massive promotion at my brokerage, making me one of their youngest senior agents. I worked with all kinds of clients. I handled delicate situations, like helping a woman sell her marital home during a vicious divorce, making sure she had the funds to secure a good lawyer for her custody battle over her children. I learned how to read people, how to protect assets, and how to close a deal. 10 years after I locked that front door and walked away from Wallace and Maxine, I was a completely different person. I was strong. I was financially secure. And I was standing in front of a gorgeous, sprawling colonial house worth $770,000, signing my name on the deed with a fancy fountain pen. But I did not buy the house for me. The phone call that pulled me back into their web came on a random Wednesday afternoon. I was standing in my modern, high-rise apartment, slicing fresh vegetables for dinner. My phone started vibrating on the granite kitchen island. I glanced at the screen and completely froze. I had not heard from Wallace in almost 3 full years. There had been 0 birthday calls. There were no Thanksgiving invitations. There was absolutely nothing. I wiped my hands on a towel, my heart suddenly beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I answered the call. "Jolene," he said. His voice sounded exactly the same. Gruff, authoritative, and completely devoid of warmth. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I was healthy, or if I was happy, or if my career was going well. He got straight to the point. "Your sister needs a place to live," Wallace demanded. "She is getting very serious with a young man named Sterling. Sterling comes from a prominent family, Jolene. They have money. He is in line for a massive inheritance. Maxine cannot be seen renting some tiny, embarrassing apartment across town. You make good money now. You need to help her out." He did not ask if I would consider it. He did not ask if I had the financial stability to take on such a massive burden. He just demanded it. He spoke to me as if I was the family handyman and he was ordering me to come fix a leaky pipe. I was 29 years old. I had closed over 40 major real estate deals that year alone. I had a phenomenal credit score, substantial savings, and the respect of my peers. I had built every single piece of my beautiful life with absolutely 0 help from the man barking orders at me through the phone. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my fingers ached. And still, despite all my success, despite all the years of therapy and self-reliance, some tiny, broken, pathetic part of my inner child whispered to me. Maybe this time it will be different, I thought. Maybe if I do this massive, life-changing favor for them, they will finally see my value. Maybe if I just give them something spectacular, they will finally love me. It is amazing the lies we tell ourselves when we are desperate for the love of the people who are supposed to protect us. So, I did it. I found a house. It was a stunning, 4-bedroom colonial in a highly sought-after, quiet suburb. It had a brand-new roof, a massive, manicured backyard with towering oak trees, and a beautiful wraparound porch. It cost $770,000. I paid the mortgage in full at the closing table. But I kept the deed entirely in my name. That was the one incredibly smart, life-saving thing I did, and I cannot even take the credit for it. It was not my idea. Darlene and I met at our favorite local coffee shop the day I told her what I was planning to do. The smell of roasted espresso and warm pastries filled the air. We were sitting in a quiet corner booth. When I told her about the house, Darlene did not yell. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she set her ceramic coffee cup down on its saucer very, very slowly. She looked at me with an expression of profound sadness. Jolene, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You are trying to buy your sister's love. You are trying to buy your father's approval. It simply does not work that way. It never will. I looked down at the table, tracing the wood grain with my fingernail. I know, Darlene. I know. But I have to try. Just this once. She leaned across the table. She looked at me the way you look at someone walking blindly toward the edge of a steep cliff. If you are going to do this, you must promise me one thing. You keep your name on that deed. Do not put Maxine's name on anything. Do you hear me? Promise me. I promised her. I made sure the legal paperwork only bore the name Jolene Mercer. Maxine moved into the colonial house exactly 1 week later. She never once asked to see the closing documents. She never asked whose name was on the paperwork. She just eagerly took the heavy brass keys from my hand, walked through the front door, and immediately started ordering expensive furniture to fill the rooms. The exclusion started small. It was so subtle, so carefully executed, that at first, I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. It was Thanksgiving, the very first holiday after Maxine had moved into the beautiful house I bought. I had spent all Wednesday evening baking 2 homemade pecan pies from scratch. Thursday morning, I called Maxine to ask what time I should bring the pies over for dinner. She answered the phone, sounding breezy and rushed. Oh, hi Jolene, she said. Listen, Sterling's family decided to come over this year. Loretta and his father, and his aunt. We do not really have enough chairs around the dining table for everyone to fit comfortably. It is going to be so cramped. Maybe we can catch up next time? I stood in my kitchen, staring at the cooling pies on the counter. Oh, I said quietly. Okay. Next time. Next time came. It was Christmas. I called her a week before the holiday. Jolene, we are actually heading up to Sterling's parents' winter estate this year, Maxine explained smoothly. Their place is massive, so much better for hosting a big group. You know how it is. We will do a dinner in January, just us. January came and went. Then it was Wallace's birthday in late February. I called to see if we were taking him to his favorite steakhouse. We are just doing a tiny, quiet dinner here at the house, Maxine told me. Dad said he did not want to make a big deal out of it this year. Just me, him, and Sterling. Every single time, she had a perfectly crafted reason. Every excuse was just believable enough that I could force myself to swallow it, as long as I did not stop to think about the bitter aftertaste. But I could not ignore the truth forever. Maxine was performing. She was playing the role of her life. To Sterling and his wealthy, connected family, she was the devoted, sweet daughter from a small, deeply close-knit family. She was acting like the exact kind of wholesome, grounded woman a man like Sterling could proudly introduce to his high-society mother, Loretta. And I did not fit into that pristine, perfect narrative. I was the estranged sister. I was the reminder of our fractured past. So, she started editing me out of her life. She did it slowly, carefully, like someone using a computer program to airbrush an ugly blemish out of an otherwise perfect photograph. I found out exactly how far she had taken her lies on a freezing night in December. I was sitting on my living room sofa, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram. I decided to search for Sterling's public profile, just out of curiosity. I clicked on his page. The very first image made my blood turn to ice. It was a glossy, perfectly lit photograph. In the center stood Maxine, Wallace, Sterling, and Sterling's parents, Loretta and her husband. They were all standing closely together, smiling brightly, arranged around the massive mahogany dining table. The dining table situated right in the center of the house I had purchased. I zoomed in on the photo. There was thick, expensive, artificial pine garland elegantly draped along the staircase banister, the exact garland I had personally picked out and bought at the hardware store for her. There were tall, glowing pillar candles lined up across the stone mantel, Candles I had paid for with my own credit card when we went shopping together months ago. I scrolled down to read the caption beneath the picture. Sterling had written, "Christmas at our home. Just us, a small family. Feeling incredibly blessed. Our home. Small family." I stared at that glowing screen for a full 30 seconds. The apartment was dead silent, except for the frantic, hammering sound of my own heart beating against my ribs. I felt a hot wave of betrayal wash over my skin. I pressed the buttons on my phone and took a screenshot of the post. I saved it to a hidden, unnamed folder in my photo gallery. I did not fully know why I was saving it right then. I just knew, deep in my gut, that I was going to need it. It was an instinct. It sounded a lot like my mother's voice, whispering in my ear to gather my armor. The phone call that permanently shattered the illusion was not from Maxine, and it was not from Wallace. It was from Harlan. Harlan is an older, highly respected real estate lawyer who works at a prestigious firm downtown. We had closed dozens of complex property deals together over the years. He was sharp, meticulous, and he knew how to read the fine print of human behavior just as well as he read legal contracts. He called me late one Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk, organizing client files. "Jolene," Harlan said, his voice unusually low and hesitant. "I need to ask you something, and it is a bit uncomfortable." "Go ahead, Harlan." "What is it?" I asked, putting my pen down. "Does your sister, Maxine, live in that colonial property you bought over on Maplecrest Drive?" "Yes, she does." "Why?" I heard Harlan take a heavy, weary breath through the phone. "Because a woman fitting Maxine's exact description, carrying photographs of the property, came into a consultation with one of my junior partners last week. She was asking very specific, detailed questions about the legalities of adverse possession." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my desk chair. Adverse possession. It is a highly specific, often incredibly messy legal concept. Essentially, if an individual lives in a property for a long enough period, openly, continuously, and pays for the upkeep without the actual, legal owner explicitly objecting or demanding a formal lease agreement, that person can eventually file a lawsuit to claim legal ownership of the property. It takes years to establish. The specific laws vary by state, and it is very hard to win. But that was not the point. The point was that Maxine was actively asking lawyers about it. My own sister was actively searching for a legal loophole to steal my $770,000 house right out from under me. I hung up with Harlan and immediately called Darlene. My hands were shaking so violently that I knocked a glass of water off my desk. It shattered on the floor, but I did not even care. I paced my office while the phone rang. Darlene listened to me panic. When I finished, she confirmed my absolute worst fear. "Jolene, listen to me," Darlene said, her voice grave. "If she secretly files the right paperwork down the road, and you do not formally challenge it in court within the specific time frame, she might actually be able to build a case against you. It is a massive stretch, yes. But the sheer fact that she is sitting in law offices asking these questions, that tells you everything you need to know about who she is." It did. It told me everything. I was not just facing the potential loss of a piece of valuable real estate. I was losing the carefully constructed fiction I had built in my own mind. The pathetic fiction that somewhere, buried underneath all the silence, the cruel rejections, and the pathetic excuses, my family actually wanted me. The fiction that buying the house was a bridge to heal our past. I had desperately wanted to believe that sharing the same blood meant loyalty. But I did not act immediately. I did not call Harlan back to start an eviction. Not yet. I was paralyzed by the lingering ghost of hope. I knew there was one final, ultimate test rapidly approaching. The wedding. Maxine and Sterling had officially announced their engagement in January. The wedding was scheduled for the middle of June. It was the talk of Sterling's social circle. It was going to be a massive, lavish, black tie event with 200 invited guests. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, negotiating with my own dignity. If she invites me to the wedding, I told myself, there is still a tiny sliver of hope. If she includes me in the most important day of her life, if she lets me stand by her side, then maybe I am overreacting. Maybe the lawyer thing was a misunderstanding. Maybe we can fix this. I was wrong. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong about all of it. The heavy, expensive wedding invitations went out in the mail during the first week of March. 200 thick envelopes were sent across the state. Not a single one of them had my name written on the front. I did not even find out from my father. I found out from Nadine. Nadine is my absolute best friend. We had known each other since we were 12 years old. She had spent countless afternoons at my house when my mother was still alive, eating snacks at our kitchen island. She was one of the very few people on this earth who had witnessed the dynamic of my family firsthand. She knew both sides of the story, and she never, ever let me pretend things were fine when they were clearly toxic. She called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was driving home from a client meeting. The Bluetooth connection clicked over the car speakers. She sounded cheerful, completely clueless about the reality of the situation. "Hey. I just checked my mail and got the wedding invite," Nadine chirped. "It is gorgeous. So, are you planning to do a big speech at the reception? Since you are the maid of honor, I assume you are giving a toast?" I gripped the leather steering wheel. The silence inside my car lasted for 6 agonizing seconds. Nadine is a very smart woman. The prolonged silence was all it took. She figured it out before I could even force a single word out of my dry throat. Her cheerful voice instantly dropped into a horrified whisper. "Jolene. Tell me you got an invite. Please." "No," I whispered back. "You are kidding me. Tell me you are kidding." "I am not kidding, Nadine. I did not get one." A minute later, my phone pinged with a text message. I pulled the car over onto the shoulder of the road and put it in park. Nadine had texted me a photograph of the invitation she received. It was printed on thick, heavy cream-colored cardstock. The text was done in shiny, elegant gold embossing. It read, "Maxine Estelle Mercer and Sterling Thomas Ashford request the honor of your presence at their wedding. June 15th. 200 guests. Reception to follow at the couple's home." The couple's home. My house. I felt a hot, blinding flash of pure rage crawl up my neck and spread across my face. I clicked over to my contacts and dialed Maxine's cell phone number immediately. It rang 4 times and went straight to her automated voicemail. I hit redial. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail again. She was ignoring me. My fingers were trembling violently as I opened a new text message. I typed out a message to Maxine. I did not bother with pleasantries. I wrote, "I just saw the wedding invitation. Am I coming to this wedding or not?" I hit send. Then, I waited. I drove home, walked into my apartment, threw my keys on the counter, and stared at my phone. I waited for 3 hours. 3 agonizing hours of staring at the dark screen, tapping it to wake it up, watching the empty chat bubble. I felt like that little electronic device owed me an explanation, owed me an apology. Finally, the screen lit up. The text bubble popped up. Maxine's reply was cold, calculated, and entirely dismissive. She wrote, "Jolene, we talked about this. The guest list is incredibly tight. Sterling's family takes priority because Loretta is paying for the catering and the string quartet. Please do not make this all about you. We talked about this. We never talked about this." We had not talked about anything of substance in years, because she had completely stopped answering my phone calls the moment the furniture was moved into the house. I picked up my phone. I typed back the only absolute truth that mattered in that moment. I wrote, "The wedding is at my house, Maxine." The little red receipt popped up at the bottom of the screen immediately. She was sitting there, watching the conversation unfold. A few seconds later, the typing bubbles appeared. Then, her final response came through. It has been my house for 2 years. Everyone knows that. I read those 2 sentences 3 times. The first time I read them, the loyal, loving sister inside me finally died. The second time I read them, the desperate peacemaker who had spent 17 years trying to fix a broken family shattered into a million pieces. The third time I read them, the last remaining ghost of that frightened 14-year-old girl at the cemetery, the girl who believed that if she just gave enough, she would be loved, evaporated completely. I set the phone down gently on the glass coffee table. I took a deep, long, shuddering breath. I looked around my quiet, safe, beautiful apartment. And for the very first time in 17 long, painful years, the fog in my brain lifted. My mind was perfectly, brilliantly clear. I knew exactly what I had to do. I called Wallace the next morning. I did not sleep that night. I just sat on my living room rug, watching the city lights outside my window slowly turn from black to dark blue, and finally to a pale, washed-out gray. I waited until exactly 8 in the morning. I knew his routine. He would be sitting in his kitchen, drinking black coffee, reading the sports section of the newspaper. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, which immediately told me he had been expecting it. He knew exactly what was happening. I asked him if he knew I was not invited to my own sister's wedding. I kept my voice entirely level. I did not want to give him the satisfaction of hearing me cry. He cleared his throat. I could hear the television playing a morning news program loudly in the background. He had not even bothered to mute it for our conversation. He told me it was my sister's wedding, and those were her rules. I gripped the phone tightly. I reminded him that it was my house. I bought that property. He let out a short, dismissive breath. He said I gave it to her, and that was done. I felt a hot prickle of anger behind my eyes. I told him I did not give it to her. I explicitly let her live there. I told him those were 2 completely different things. He told me it was the exact same thing. Then, the pause stretched between us. I listened to the muffled voice of the news anchor on his television. Then, Wallace let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sigh a parent gives a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. He told me not to start. He said I always did this. I asked him what exactly I always did. He told me I made everything a drama. He demanded that I just let my sister be happy for once. For once. The words hung in the air. As if Maxine had ever been denied a single, solitary thing in her entire life. As if happiness was a freshly baked pie sitting on the counter, and there was only one slice left, and it absolutely had to have Maxine's name carved into the crust. I asked him what about me? What about my happiness? The silence stretched incredibly long. I could hear the play-by-play of whatever sports highlight was flashing across his screen. Then, he spoke very quietly. He spoke almost gently, which honestly made it 1,000 times worse. He told me I would be fine. He said I always am. Then, he hung up the phone. I sat on my kitchen floor for a very long time after the line went dead. I did not cry. I just sat there holding the phone in my lap like it was a heavy, dead stone. You will be fine. You always are. He said it like it was a glowing compliment. He said it like my ability to survive every single terrible thing they threw at me was a feature, not a deep, bleeding scar. He genuinely believed that just because I always managed to land on my feet, it meant it was perfectly acceptable to keep pushing me off the ledge. That specific sentence, those few words, was the absolute cruelest thing my father ever said to me in my entire life. It was not cruel because it was angry. It was cruel because it was completely calm, and because he fully believed it. In his mind, my independence was his permanent permission slip to never show up for me again. And he never did. I did something later that afternoon that I am not entirely proud of. I broke down and wrote Maxine a long, detailed message. I was not angry. I was not begging. I was just laying out the absolute truth. I told her about every holiday I missed. I told her about every single phone call she did not return. I told her about every time I made a pathetic excuse for her behavior because facing the reality was just too heavy for me to carry. I even told her about the college fund. I told her I knew Wallace took my money and gave it to her. I told her I bought that massive house because I foolishly thought it would bring us closer together as a family. Then, I asked her one simple question. I asked her if she actually wanted me out of her life, or if she had just been too incredibly comfortable in my house to notice I was still standing here waiting. I watched the screen. I saw the little indicator show that she read the message. She did not reply. 2 agonizing days later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. I opened it. It was from Sterling. My chest immediately tightened. Sterling wrote that Maxine told him I had been severely pressuring her about the wedding. He said he understood I felt left out, but this was their special day. He told me to please respect their wishes. Then, a second message popped up from him. He wrote that they appreciated the house, but I needed to stop using it as leverage against them. I read that word twice. Leverage. Maxine had not just excluded me from the guest list. She had actively built a completely fictional story. In her twisted version of reality, I was the difficult, bitter sister. I was the crazy one who could not let go. I was the wealthy, manipulative sibling who dangled money and real estate to control the people around me. She had flipped the entire narrative upside down. She turned me from the person who gave everything into the person who used everything. And Sterling fully believed her. Why would he not believe her? He had never even met me. He did not even know I existed until I suddenly became a problem to be dealt with. I put my phone face down on the granite counter. I leaned back and stared up at the white ceiling. I still did not cry. For the first time in my entire life, facing my family's betrayal, I did not shed a single tear. Something deep and fundamental shifted completely behind my ribs. It was not hot anger. It was not crushing sadness. It was something much colder. It was something incredibly quiet. It felt exactly like the heavy metal lock finally clicking shut on a massive door I had been holding open until my arms ached for 17 years. I walked over to my home office. I opened my laptop. I looked up Harlan's direct phone number at his law firm. But first, I called Darlene. I called her at 9 o'clock that night. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my dining table, and I told her absolutely everything. I told her about the missing invitation, the cruel texts, Wallace's 6 devastating words, and Sterling's warning message. I told her exactly what Maxine had been telling her new, wealthy in-laws. I told her about the adverse possession inquiry Harlan had warned me about. Then, I finally said the one thing I had been terrified to say out loud to anyone. I told Darlene I thought I had been a massive fool. Darlene was quiet for a long moment. She did not say she told me so. She never did. She told me I was not a fool. She said I was a loving daughter who desperately wanted her family back. She said that was not a weakness, Jolene. That is exactly who my mother raised me to be. I pressed my fist hard against my mouth to keep my chin from trembling. Then, her tone shifted to pure business. She asked me about the deed. She asked if it was still strictly in my name. I told her yes. Only my name. She let out a sharp breath of relief. She said good. She told me that was the only piece of paper that mattered in the entire world right now. The very next morning, I drove downtown. I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up to the 30th floor. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from Harlan in his massive corner office. He was wearing his reading glasses on a silver chain around his neck. He was the kind of seasoned real estate lawyer who spoke slowly, as if he was billing his clients by the individual syllable, but he meant absolutely every word he said. He meticulously reviewed the thick stack of documents I brought him for 20 solid minutes. He read the original deed, the county property records, and my tax filings. Everything was exclusively in my name. There was absolutely no lease agreement with Maxine. There was no rental contract. There was no written permission of any kind proving she had a right to be there. Harlan finally looked up over the rim of his glasses. He asked me who had been paying the county property taxes. I told him I paid them. I paid them in full, every single year. I told him the mortgage was paid off completely at closing. It was mine, free and clear. He slowly took off his reading glasses and folded them on his mahogany desk. He looked at me with total professional certainty. He stated that my sister had absolutely no legal claim to this property. He said there was no lease, no contract, and no equitable interest whatsoever. Legally speaking, she was nothing more than a guest in my house. Nothing more. A guest. Maxine had been living rent-free in a $770,000 home for 2 solid years. She had been throwing lavish Christmas parties, playing house, and planning a 200-person luxury wedding right in the living room, telling the entire world it was hers. And legally, she was just a temporary guest. I leaned forward in the leather chair. I looked Harlan dead in the eye and asked him one single question. I asked him if I sold the house right now, could she legally stop me? Harlan looked right back at me. He said no. That single word sat in the quiet, air-conditioned room like a heavy stone dropped into perfectly still water. 2 days later, Nadine called me while I was eating my lunch. She had a piece of information that literally knocked the wind right out of my lungs. She told me she needed to tell me something terrible. She explained that she had attended the formal engagement party the previous month. It was hosted at the Ashford family's exclusive country club. Obviously, I had not been invited to that event either. Nadine told me that during the dinner, Maxine stood up and gave a toast. She publicly thanked Wallace. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and called him her only family. Then, Nadine paused. Her voice shook slightly. She told me that Sterling's uncle had leaned over and politely asked Maxine if she had any siblings. Maxine looked the man in the eye and said, "Just me. I am an only child." I closed my eyes tightly. I pressed the phone hard against my ear. Nadine asked me if I was still there. I told her I was here. That night, I opened my laptop and I did something I had actively avoided doing for 2 years. I went through absolutely everything online. I dug through Sterling's social media. I dug through Maxine's social media. I looked at every single photograph, every tagged location, every single comment from the past 24 months. On Sterling's feed, there were photos of expensive vacations with Maxine. There were pictures of fancy dinners with Wallace. There were massive holiday gatherings at the house. There was not a single photograph of me. There was not one single mention of my name. Then, I went to Maxine's feed. It was worse. She had actually gone back through her entire digital history and meticulously deleted or cropped every single old family photograph that ever included me. She cropped me out of childhood birthday parties. She cropped me out of old Thanksgiving dinners. She even deleted the photo from our mother's memorial service because I was standing in the background. In every single image of her life, I was simply gone. It was like I had been physically cut out of existence with a pair of sharp scissors. Then, I found the post that made my hands shake so badly I had to put the laptop down on the coffee table. It was a post from Sterling, dated 6 months ago. It was a photograph of Wallace sitting at the head of my dining table, laughing loudly with a crystal wine glass raised in the air. Sterling's caption read, "So incredibly grateful for Maxine's dad. Wallace is the absolute sweetest father-in-law. Just us, a small family, and that is all we need." But the comment section is what truly shattered me. Someone had commented under a photo of the house, writing, "Beautiful place. How did you guys swing that?" Maxine had replied directly to the comment. She wrote, "Dad helped us out. Family takes care of family. She openly credited Wallace for buying my house. And Wallace, who certainly saw the post, completely let her do it. I took screenshots of absolutely everything. I saved every image, every lie, every comment. Then, I shut the laptop firmly. She did not just cut me out of the guest list. She completely rewrote the story of our lives. And in her perfect, shiny new version, Jolene Mercer never even existed. I sat alone in my dark apartment for a very long time that night. All the lights were turned off. The only illumination was the faint orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the window blinds. It cast a shadow across a framed photograph of my mother that I kept on the bookshelf near the front door. My mother was exactly 31 years old in that photograph. My exact age now. She was holding me as a tiny baby, smiling at the camera like the entire world made perfect sense. I sat in the quiet and I thought deeply about what she would say if she were sitting on the sofa next to me. If she could see all of this. The stolen house, the deafening silence, the carefully cropped photos, the elaborate lies. And I heard her voice. Not literally, of course. But I heard it the way you hear the voice of someone you have loved so deeply that their words live permanently inside your own bones. I heard her say, "Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are not worthy." I picked up my cell phone. I dialed Harlan's personal cell number. He answered. I told him to list the house on the market immediately. Harlan paused for a second. He asked me if I was absolutely sure. He warned me that once the paperwork was in motion, it was done. I told him I was completely sure. It took exactly 3 weeks. The real estate market was incredibly hot, and the house was beautiful. Harlan handled everything discreetly through a private network so the listing would not show up publicly online and tip Maxine off. He found a buyer very quickly. It was a young family relocating to the city from out of state. They completely fell in love with the property. They offered the full asking price. No complicated contingencies. It was an incredibly clean, cash-heavy deal. We set the closing date for June 14th. Exactly 1 single day before the wedding. I went into Harlan's office on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat at his conference table and I signed my name on a towering stack of legal documents. The heavy house keys changed hands. The transaction officially closed at exactly 4:17 in the afternoon. The colonial house on Maplecrest Drive was officially no longer mine. Which meant, by the strict letter of the law, it was absolutely no longer Maxine's house to stand inside of. Harlan had prepared the formal notice to vacate. It was a standard 30-day eviction notice, completely legal and watertight. I chose the specific delivery date. June 15th. The exact day of the wedding. Darlene came over to my apartment that evening. She did not say much at first. She just walked into the kitchen, poured 2 generous glasses of red wine, handed me one, and sat down on the sofa. She took a sip and asked me how exactly I wanted to execute this. I looked down at my wine glass. I told her very quietly that I just wanted my sister to finally know the absolute truth. I sat alone in my living room for hours after Darlene left. I was not happy. I was not sad. I just felt completely, overwhelmingly hollow. I felt exactly like a medical patient who had finally agreed to amputate a limb that had been dead and infected for years, but I had just been too terrified of the pain to let the doctors cut it off. If you have ever been forced to make the agonizing choice between blind family loyalty and your own basic self-respect, you know exactly what that deep hollow feeling is like. June 15th arrived. It was a Saturday. It was 82 degrees outside, with a perfectly clear, cloudless blue sky. I got into my car at 6:30 in the evening and drove toward the wealthy suburb. I did not drive up to the house itself. I parked at the very end of the block, pulling my car underneath the thick, hanging branches of a massive oak tree, 199-200. From my parking spot, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the long driveway and the front lawn from a safe distance. I turned off the engine and rolled down the windows. The house looked absolutely magnificent. I had to give them credit for the decorations. There were thousands of tiny, glowing white fairy lights strewn beautifully along the wooden perimeter fence. There were elegant paper lanterns lining the brick walkway leading up to the porch. The entire street was packed tight with luxury cars. I saw sleek BMWs, several Mercedes, and a massive black Escalade parked right near the front door that I figured belonged to Loretta, Sterling's wealthy mother. The warm evening breeze carried the sounds of the party straight through my open car windows. I could hear a live jazz band playing smooth music. I heard loud bursts of laughter. I heard the constant, sharp clinking of crystal champagne glasses. 200 elegantly dressed people were inside, eating expensive food and drinking fine wine, celebrating a marriage inside a spectacular house they fully believed belonged to the bride. My cell phone lit up on the passenger seat. The caller ID showed Nadine's name. I picked it up and held it to my ear. "I am inside," Nadine whispered urgently into the phone. There was loud music and chatter behind her voice. "Jolene, it is gorgeous in here. The floral arrangements must have cost a fortune. The food is incredible. There is a live string quartet out on the back patio." I stared straight ahead at the glowing house. "How does she look?" I asked. "She is practically glowing," Nadine said, her tone filled with a mix of awe and disgust. "Sterling is wearing a custom gray suit. Maxine looks absolutely stunning in her dress. They literally just finished their first dance." There was a brief pause on the line. The music swelled in the background. "Jolene," Nadine said, her voice dropping lower, sounding incredibly sad. "I am so incredibly sorry you are not here tonight." I gripped the steering wheel. I told her it was okay. It was a lie, of course. My chest was physically aching. But sometimes, lying to yourself is the only tiny piece of kindness you can afford to give yourself in a terrible moment. Then, Nadine said the one specific thing that permanently sealed their fate. "She just gave her speech," Nadine whispered. She stood up with a microphone. She publicly thanked Wallace. I am quoting her exactly here, Jolene. She thanked him for giving me absolutely everything, including this beautiful home to start my family in. I felt my jaw clench so tight my teeth ground together. And what did Wallace do? He stood up, smiled at the crowd, and took a literal bow, Nadine said in disbelief. People actually clapped for him. I squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. But that is not the worst part, Nadine continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Jolene, she told the crowd that she wishes her mom could be here tonight. She looked right at the guests and said that our mother is the only person missing from her family tonight. The only one missing." I was sitting exactly 200 yards away. I was parked alone in a dark car on a public street, listening through a cell phone while my own flesh and blood sister completely erased my existence in real time. She was standing on a stage built inside a house that my hard-earned money paid for. And according to the story she was telling 200 people, the only empty chair at that lavish wedding belonged to a woman who had passed away 17 years ago. I was not missing. I had been deliberately, surgically removed. And now, it was finally time to permanently remove myself from their equation entirely. If you've made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let's get back to my story. I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It read 8:41 p.m. I ended the call with Nadine and immediately dialed Harlan's number. He answered on the first ring. He was waiting. "Send it," I said. My voice was completely steady. Cold as ice. "You are absolutely certain?" Harlan asked one final time. "Yes," I replied. Harlan executed 2 things simultaneously from his office computer. First, he dispatched the formal, legally binding notice to vacate. It was being delivered physically to the property address via a specialized, bonded courier service requiring immediate signature confirmation. 30 days. Completely standard legal procedure. Second, he triggered one single, scheduled email. The email was sent directly to 3 addresses: Maxine, Sterling, and Wallace. All 3 of them received the exact same message at the exact same moment. I had written the draft of that email the night before. I sat at my kitchen table and revised the text 4 different times. With every single revision, the email got shorter and shorter. The final draft was exactly 6 lines long. The email read, "The property located at 114 Maplecrest Drive has been officially sold. The real estate transaction successfully closed on June 14. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises completely." Enclosed in this email are 1. A certified copy of the original deed in my name. 2. The signed legal sale agreement. 3. The formal 30-day notice to vacate. I wish you both a very happy marriage. Jolene. There were absolutely no exclamation marks. There were no angry accusations. There was zero emotion. It was just cold, hard facts, irrefutable legal documents, and a strict deadline. The email included 3 specific PDF attachments. The original deed, showing my name as clear as daylight. The final sale contract, showing the new buyer's name, the massive sale price, and the closing date. And finally, the 30-day eviction notice typed elegantly on Harlan's prestigious law firm letterhead. Every legal box was meticulously checked, every single line was perfectly lawful. Harlan pressed send at exactly 8:47 p.m. I sat in the car. The live jazz band was still playing an upbeat song. I could hear the brass instruments drifting faintly through the open windows of the house 200 yards away. Through the evening air, I heard someone let out a loud, generous, champagne-fueled laugh. It was the specific kind of booming laugh people only do at expensive weddings when they genuinely believe everything in the world is absolutely perfect. I reached forward and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I drove all the way home. I did not check my cell phone. I did not call Nadine back to ask for updates. I did not call Darlene. I did not even look in the rearview mirror as the glowing house faded into the distance behind me. I walked into my quiet apartment. I locked the deadbolt. I went into the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and brushed my teeth. I climbed into my comfortable bed, pulled the heavy duvet up to my chin, and I slept. I slept incredibly deeply, completely without dreaming. For the first time in several agonizing months, my mind was entirely at peace. Whatever chaotic nightmare was currently unfolding inside the walls of that colonial house right now, it was officially no longer my house, and it was absolutely no longer my problem. The fallout was catastrophic. Nadine called me at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning to deliver the full report. I walked into the kitchen, started the coffee maker, poured myself a hot mug, and sat down at the table before I answered her call. "Jolene," Nadine gasped the second the line connected. "Oh my God. You have to let me tell you everything." She told me exactly how it went down. Around 9 o'clock the previous night, roughly 12 minutes after Harlan sent the email, Maxine was standing near the dance floor. Sterling's uncle was in the middle of a lengthy, slightly drunken toast. Maxine felt her phone buzz in her small bridal clutch. She pulled it out and glanced casually at the glowing screen. Nadine was standing near the bar and saw the exact moment it happened. Maxine went completely white. She did not flush red. She went pale white, like every single drop of blood had been instantly drained from her face. She quickly excused herself from the crowd, weaving through the tables until she found Wallace standing near the open bar. Nadine casually moved closer to listen. She was close enough to hear Wallace loudly whisper, "What do you mean the house is sold?" Maxine hissed something frantic back at him that Nadine could not quite catch, but Wallace's jaw instantly tightened like a thick wire pulled tight. The two of them practically sprinted to the empty front hallway. The argument was hushed and fiercely controlled, the specific way people argue when they are surrounded by hundreds of wealthy guests they desperately need to impress. But their body language screamed pure panic. Wallace was angrily jabbing his thick finger toward the hardwood floor. Maxine was pressing her palm flat against the hallway wall, looking like she physically needed it to keep her knees from buckling. Sterling noticed. Of course he noticed. It was his own wedding. He saw his new bride looking terrified. He walked over in his tailored suit and gently touched Maxine's arm. "What is wrong?" Sterling asked. Maxine stammered. "It is nothing. Everything is fine." Sterling frowned. "You look like you are going to be physically sick." He saw the cell phone clutched in her shaking hand. Before she could stop him, he reached out and took the phone from her grip. He looked at the screen. He read the short email. The front hallway suddenly got very, very quiet. The sound of the jazz band seemed miles away. Sterling looked up from the screen, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He looked right at his new wife and asked, "Who the hell is Jolene Mercer?" Maxine's mouth opened. Absolutely nothing came out for 3 agonizingly long seconds. Finally, she choked out one word. "Nobody." Sterling did not accept that. He tapped the screen and opened the PDF attachments. He zoomed in on the legal documents. "The deed?" Sterling said out loud, his voice rising in panic. "This deed has her name on it. The address is right here. The house we are standing inside right now." He looked at Maxine, his eyes wide. "The deed says Jolene Mercer." "Maxine, you looked me in the eye and told me this was your father's house." Maxine frantically reached for the phone. "Sterling, please give it back, let me explain." Sterling quickly pulled the phone back, stepping away from her. Just then, Loretta, Sterling's mother, appeared at the end of the long hallway. She was wearing a stunning, floor-length silk dress and heavy pearl earrings. She had the kind of sharp, aristocratic face that could read the tension in a room from 40 feet away. "What on earth is going on over here?" Loretta demanded, her heels clicking on the wood. Sterling did not say a word. He simply turned the glowing phone screen toward his mother. Loretta pulled her reading glasses from her clutch and read the email. She read the attachments. She lowered the phone. She looked coldly at Maxine. Then she looked at Wallace. Loretta snapped her small evening clutch shut. It echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hall. She turned around and began walking toward the heavy oak front door. But Loretta did not leave. That would have been too easy. She stopped abruptly right at the threshold of the front door, turned slowly around, and walked purposefully back toward them. That was infinitely worse. She planted herself directly in front of Maxine in the grand foyer. They were standing right in the spot where the string quartet had been playing beautiful classical music just 10 minutes earlier. By now, a dozen curious guests had gathered nearby, desperately pretending they were not watching the drama unfold. Loretta crossed her arms. Her voice was icy and carried perfectly. "My son just asked you a very simple question," she said. "Who exactly is Jolene Mercer?" Maxine ran a trembling hand through her perfectly styled bridal hair. She tried to force a polite, charming smile. It failed completely. It is very complicated, Loretta," Maxine stammered. "She is just a very distant relative. We do not speak." That was the exact moment Nadine decided she had seen enough. Nadine stepped forward out of the crowd of onlookers. Nadine told me later she genuinely had not planned to get involved. But she had drank 2 glasses of strong champagne, and she had spent the last 17 years of her life watching me get systematically erased and emotionally abused by these people. Hearing Maxine lie right to her new family's face was the breaking point. Something inside Nadine just snapped. She is her sister, Nadine said loudly, her voice ringing clearly across the foyer. Jolene is her younger sister. And she is the actual owner who bought this entire house with her own money. The massive foyer went completely, terrifyingly silent. It was not like a silence in a dramatic movie. It was real, suffocating silence. It was the kind of dead quiet where you could actually hear a guest shift their leather shoe uncomfortably against the hardwood floor. Loretta whipped her head around and stared daggers at Wallace. "You have another daughter?" she demanded. Wallace instinctively straightened his broad shoulders, falling back on his old, arrogant habits. "Listen, Loretta, this is private family business." Loretta did not back down an inch. "It became my family's business the exact moment my son married into your pathetic lies." That word. Lies. It landed in the quiet room like a physical, stinging slap across the face. Wallace actually flinched. Nadine swore to me she saw him physically flinch backward. I had never, in my entire 29 years on this earth, seen my father flinch at anything. I was not even in the room, but Nadine described the scene so precisely I could vividly see it playing out behind my eyelids. Sterling stepped forward, placing himself squarely between his angry mother and his trembling new wife. Nadine described the look on his face as the expression of a man watching his entire house burn down to the foundation in real time. He turned slowly to Maxine. His voice was dangerously low. "You looked me in the eye and told me you were an only child." "Sterling, please, just let me explain the situation," Maxine pleaded, reaching for his hands. He pulled away from her again. "You told me your father bought this house for us. You told my family he was a successful businessman who paid for this property." Maxine was crying now, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "It is not what it looks like." Sterling cut her off. "What else did you lie to me about?" That terrible question hung heavy and thick in the stifling air of the foyer. It was not just about the stolen house anymore. It was not just about erasing my existence. It was about absolutely everything. The entire foundational trust of their marriage, a marriage that was exactly 1 day old, was violently cracking apart right in front of 200 wealthy, judgmental people. Maxine's face rapidly cycled through 3 distinct stages of panic. Nadine counted them for me over the phone. First, total denial. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Nadine like she had just set off a loud fire alarm. "Sterling, do not listen to her. Nadine does not know what she is talking about. She is Jolene's best friend. She is completely biased." Nadine did not flinch or back down. She stood her ground. "I went to middle school and high school with both of you, Maxine," Nadine fired back. "I was sitting in the church at your mother's funeral. I watched you eat dinner at Jolene's kitchen table for 16 years. Do not call me a liar." Second, desperate deflection. Maxine frantically turned to the crowded room, addressing the staring guests, addressing anyone who would possibly listen to her. She spread her hands out wide in a gesture of victimhood. "Jolene has always been exactly like this. She is deeply jealous of me. She is just doing this tonight to ruin my beautiful wedding because she cannot stand to see me finally be happy." Loretta's sharp voice sliced right through the pathetic excuses. "She did not come to your wedding to ruin it, Maxine," Loretta stated coldly. "You did not even let her attend." Third, total collapse. Maxine slowly turned her head and looked at Wallace. Nadine said she looked exactly the way a young child looks at a parent when the strict teacher finally catches them cheating on a major exam. Her eyes screamed, "Fix this for me. Help me fix this mess." Wallace did not move a single muscle. His mouth was set in a hard, thin, white line. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his expensive tuxedo pants. For the very first time in my entire life, in Nadine's vivid retelling, Wallace Mercer had absolutely nothing to say. There was no booming lecture to fix the situation. There was no clever misdirection to change the subject. There was no arrogant claim that this was private family business. There was just total, Humiliating silence from a man who had spent 63 years of his life always making sure he had the final, authoritative word on everything. Sterling finally stood up straight. He looked exhausted. He smoothed the front of his tailored suit jacket. He did not yell at her. He did not cry. He just looked at Maxine and said very quietly, "I need some air." He turned around and walked out the heavy front door into the warm night. Two of his groomsmen immediately followed him out. Then his aunt grabbed her purse and walked out, followed quickly by his cousin. Loretta was the last one to leave the foyer. She paused right at the doorway, turned her head, and looked back at Wallace. Nadine described the expression on the wealthy woman's face as the absolute end of something. It was pure disgust. She walked out into the night. The DJ in the ballroom had completely stopped playing the music 20 minutes ago during the shouting. Nobody asked him to turn it back on. Maxine stood completely alone in the center of the grand foyer. The guests began to quickly file past her in small, murmuring, awkward groups. They collected their coats and expensive purses from the coat check. Not a single person stopped to say goodbye or offer congratulations. The driveway slowly emptied out. The very last luxury car pulled away from the curb at exactly 11:14 p.m. The lavish wedding was completely over. Wallace called me at exactly 7 o'clock the next morning. It was Sunday. I was sitting comfortably at my kitchen table. I had a hot cup of coffee in my hand and the Sunday newspaper spread out in front of me. I saw his name flash on the screen. I let the phone ring twice. Then, I picked it up. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was low, gravelly, and shaking violently. He was not shaking with grief or regret. He was shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I sold my house, Dad." "You completely ruined your sister's wedding," he yelled into the receiver. "No," I corrected him calmly. "I sold my legally owned property. That is my absolute legal right to do." "You need to fix this right now," he demanded, his voice echoing loudly in my quiet kitchen. "Call the damn buyer. Undo the contract. It is done, Dad. The papers are signed and the money is transferred. It is officially not my house anymore." "You did this specifically to hurt her," he accused. I set my ceramic coffee mug down gently on the table. "No, Wallace. I did this because she completely erased my existence." "You both did." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear his heavy, uneven breathing through the speaker. It was the frantic, ragged breathing of a stubborn man who was entirely unused to being on the losing side of a negotiation. Then, he pulled out the absolute last weapon he had left in his pathetic arsenal. "Your mother would be deeply ashamed of you," he sneered. There it was. The ultimate trump card. The cruel invocation of a dead woman who could not physically speak up to defend herself. It was being used by the very man who broke every single promise he ever made to her while she was alive. My voice did not shake. I want that on the permanent record. My voice did not shake, and my volume did not rise. "Mom would be ashamed of what you did to her daughter," I said. There was absolutely nothing from his end of the line. I counted 5 seconds in my head. Then 10 seconds. Finally, he spoke. "Do not ever call me again, Jolene." "I was not planning to ever call you again, Dad," I replied smoothly. He slammed the phone down and hung up. I sat there at the table. My coffee slowly got cold. The Sunday newspaper stayed completely unread. The apartment was incredibly quiet, but it was a good quiet. It was quiet in the specific way that only empty rooms are quiet. It was the kind of quiet that has real, substantial weight to it. That morning was the absolute last conversation I ever had with my father. It was not the last time he tried to reach out to me. That came much later, mostly through other distant relatives calling me, trying to use softer, pleading tones. But that Sunday morning was the very last time I ever picked up the telephone for Wallace Mercer. Some doors in life close with a loud, violent slam. This door closed with a very quiet, final click. And I was the one who happily turned the heavy lock. Maxine called me on Monday afternoon. I stared at the screen for a long time. I almost did not answer the phone. But a small part of me realized I needed to hear exactly what she was going to say. I was not answering out of hope. Not anymore. I was answering purely for closure. I swiped the screen. "Hello, Maxine. You cannot do this to me," she sobbed. Her voice was incredibly raw and hoarse. It was the exhausted, broken voice of a person who had spent the entire night screaming, crying, or likely doing both. "This is my home, Jolene. This is my house." "It was never your home, Maxine," I said flatly. "It was always my house. I simply let you live there." "I am going to sue you," she shrieked. "Go right ahead," I told her, leaning back in my office chair. "The deed is strictly in my name. It always was. Harlan is waiting for your lawyer's call." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the line. Then, the inevitable shift came. I had been waiting for it. I knew her tactics perfectly. It was the exact moment she quickly switched from violent rage to manipulative charm, dropping the weapon and picking up the tool. "Jolene, please, come on," she pleaded, her tone suddenly dropping lower. It sounded softer, almost artificially warm. "We are family. We are sisters. I know things have not been absolutely perfect between us, but we can easily work this out. I will talk to Sterling. We will have you over to the house for a nice dinner. We can." "You told your new husband that I do not exist," I interrupted her. That sentence landed between us like a massive brick wall. "I can fully explain that," she stammered. "You really do not need to explain anything," I said. "I understand the situation perfectly." "Jolene, please listen to me," she begged. "Sterling is absolutely furious. His mother Loretta will not even return my phone calls today. If you could just..." "Just what, Maxine?" I asked sharply. "Just swoop in and fix the mess for you, exactly like I have always done?" She did not have an answer for that. "You have exactly 30 days to pack your things," I told her. "That is the state law. I highly suggest you start using those days to find an apartment." "Where the hell are we supposed to go?" she cried. "That is honestly not my problem anymore, Maxine," I replied. There was another long, desperate pause. Then, she spoke very quietly. And this was the specific part of the conversation that almost managed to get to me. "I am sorry," she whispered. 2 little words. 17 agonizing years late. "Sorry for what, exactly?" I challenged her. And she could not answer the question. She literally could not bring herself to name the terrible things she was apologizing for. Because naming the abuse would mean fully admitting that it actually happened. And admitting that it happened would mean she was no longer the innocent victim in her own story. "Goodbye, Maxine," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked down at my hands. My hand was perfectly steady. My chest ached horribly, yes. But my hand was steady, and in that moment, that physical steadiness mattered so much more than the pain. Harlan called me on Wednesday morning to officially confirm what I already knew. "The real estate sale is fully recorded with the county," Harlan announced proudly. "The title has been completely transferred to the new family. The massive funds have been successfully deposited directly into your private bank account." He paused for a moment. "It is completely done, Jolene. It was a clean and entirely legal transaction." Clean and legal. Those 3 simple words somehow felt incredibly heavier and more substantial than the $770,000 now sitting securely in my bank account. Maxine did end up hiring a lawyer. Of course, she did. Wallace probably drained his own savings account to pay the retainer fee for her, but it did not matter in the end. Harlan told me later, secondhand through a colleague at another law firm, how the consultation went. Maxine's expensive attorney reviewed the stack of documents for about 15 minutes before delivering the harsh legal verdict. The attorney told her she absolutely did not have a case. I clearly owned the property. There was zero lease. There was no rental agreement. There was no written arrangement of any kind between us. The lawyer bluntly told her she had zero legal standing to fight the eviction. Maxine had lived in my beautiful house for 2 whole years. She had decorated the rooms, hosted lavish holidays in the dining room, meticulously planned her luxury wedding in the living room, and confidently told 200 people it was her property. And legally, she had absolutely nothing to show for it. She did not have a single, flimsy piece of paper with her name on it. Why? Because she was so arrogant she never even thought to ask. Because it literally never occurred to her privileged mind that the quiet, submissive sister she had spent years actively erasing from the world might one day wake up and need concrete proof that she actually existed. She had 30 short days to pack up her life and move out. Her and Sterling, a pair of miserable newlyweds, spending their honeymoon phase packing endless cardboard boxes. Sterling did not immediately file for divorce. Honestly, I was glad to hear about that. I was not glad for Maxine's sake, but because I truly did not want to be the live grenade that completely destroyed a marriage. What I desperately wanted was just for the absolute truth to be laid bare on the table for everyone to see. What happened between the two of them after the dust settled was strictly between them. But Sterling had incredibly strict conditions if he was going to stay. Nadine heard all the juicy details through the sprawling country club grapevine. Sterling demanded mandatory couples therapy every single week. He demanded full, transparent financial disclosure of every account and every debt. And finally, he demanded that Maxine sit down and have an honest, unedited conversation with me. That last condition was entirely up to me to accept or reject. Sterling reached out through Nadine to broker the meeting. I told Nadine to pass along a message. Tell him I appreciate the polite offer, I said. But not yet. And to be perfectly honest, maybe not ever. That is my choice to make. It was the very first time in my entire adult life that I had made a major decision regarding my family without agonizing over whether or not they would approve of it. The relief was staggering. It felt exactly like I was taking a massive, deep breath of fresh air after holding my breath underwater for 17 agonizing years. Here is the most entertaining thing about having 200 wealthy, gossiping witnesses at a disaster. You absolutely cannot put the ugly truth back inside the bottle once it spills. Within just 1 week, the wild story had rapidly traveled through every single elite social circle that Maxine and Wallace had spent decades carefully curating. The scandalous tale echoed through the halls of the country club. It was whispered over fences in their upscale neighborhood. It was the main topic of conversation in Wallace's weekly golf foursome. It spread like wildfire among Sterling's prestigious fraternity brothers and Maxine's coworkers. The exact details of the story varied slightly depending on who was eagerly telling it, but the fundamental bones of the gossip were always exactly the same. The groom's secret sister bought the bride a massive house. The bride cruelly erased the sister from the family history. The sister ruthlessly sold the house right out from under them on the actual day of the wedding. Every single retelling of the story ended the exact same way, with a low, impressed whistle or a slow, judgmental shake of the head. Loretta, Sterling's mother, wasted no time telling her elite book club exactly what happened. Nadine practically giggled when she confirmed this piece of gossip to me. Loretta's exact, devastating words were reportedly, "If she is capable of lying so easily about having a sister who bought her a house, what other dark secrets is she hiding in her closet?" That single, poisoned sentence traveled through the wealthy Ashford family's social circle like a raging brush fire in a dry forest. By the end of that first month, Maxine had rapidly gone from being considered a great, wholesome catch to being the lying girl Loretta's son should have vetted much better. But Wallace took the public fallout the hardest of all. His wealthy golf friends, men he had known, played with, and respected for decades, started asking him incredibly uncomfortable questions he simply could not answer without looking like a monster. One of his oldest friends, a highly respected retired judge named Walter, confronted him directly. He said it right to Wallace's face over lunch at the club. "You completely froze out your own flesh and blood daughter, Wallace. The very girl who worked hard and bought your older kid that massive house." Wallace was so deeply humiliated that he abruptly stood up and left the upscale restaurant before the waiter even brought the check to the table. Nadine heard that specific story third-hand, but I fully believed it. I believed it because Wallace's entire fragile identity was completely built on the illusion of being a respectable, upstanding man. A good, traditional father. A strong provider for his family. And now, the very wealthy people he desperately respected the most were looking right at him and seeing a completely different, terrible person. Maxine and Sterling eventually moved out. They moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment all the way across town. There was no massive, manicured yard. There were no elegant string lights. There was certainly no stone patio large enough to host a live string quartet. The beautiful colonial house on Maplecrest Drive, the house that was once mine, and the house that Maxine falsely claimed as hers, now officially belonged to the Brennan family. They were a sweet young couple with two small, energetic children. A few weeks after they moved in, they repainted the heavy wooden front door a bright, cheerful shade of red. I drove by the property just once, to see it for myself. The red door looked incredibly nice. It looked like a real home. Darlene told me a fascinating story about a week later. She had done something incredibly brave. She had called Wallace and asked him to meet her at a small, independent coffee shop downtown. She chose a very public place, a piece of entirely neutral ground. To Darlene's utter surprise, he actually showed up. She told me he looked incredibly haggard and old. Darlene said it looked like 10 hard years of aging had hit his face in just 10 short days. Darlene did not waste time easing into the conversation. She never did. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table, and looked him right in the eye. "Estelle explicitly asked me to watch over Jolene," Darlene told him. "Do you want to know why she asked me to do that? Because she knew in her heart that you absolutely would not protect her." Wallace's large hand tightened violently around his paper coffee cup. "Do not bring Estelle into this mess," he growled. "Estelle is deeply involved in this mess," Darlene fired back without blinking. "She was always in this. She saw exactly what you were doing to those girls long before she died. She told me everything." Wallace looked stunned. "She told you what?" "She told me that you had already picked Maxine as your favorite," Darlene said coldly. "She told me you had already quietly decided that Jolene was going to be second best. She made me swear a promise, Wallace. Not just to watch over that little girl, but to be completely ready to fight you. Because she knew what you were." Wallace just stared silently at the wooden table. Darlene said his thick jaw was working furiously, the muscles twitching as if he was desperately trying to chew on heavy words that he simply could not bring himself to swallow. "She did not ask me to be Jolene's legal godmother just because of some silly religious tradition, Wallace," Darlene pressed on, her voice filled with righteous anger. "She asked me to do it because she was physically terrified of what you would do to that poor girl when she was no longer around to protect her from you." Darlene paused, letting the heavy truth settle over him. And she was absolutely right. Wallace stood up slowly. He did not violently push his chair back. He just rose stiffly, like an old man leaving a quiet church pew. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and tossed it onto the table to cover his coffee. He walked out of the coffee shop, his shoulders slumped, without ever turning around to look back at her. Darlene called me that evening to tell me about the meeting. Her voice was incredibly steady, but it was also very soft. It sounded exactly the way a person's voice gets when they have been carrying a massive, heavy boulder on their back for years, and they have finally found a place to set it down. "I finally said what your mother would have wanted to say to his face," Darlene told me through the phone. The rest of his miserable life is entirely up to him now. I held my phone tightly against my ear for a very long time after we finally hung up. I looked over at the framed photograph of my mother sitting by the front door. My mother had been dead and buried for 17 long years, and somehow, she was still actively protecting me from harm. Some parents leave behind detailed instructions when they pass away. My incredible mother left behind a heavy, impenetrable shield. People always ask me about the money. When they hear the story, they focus on the cash. $770,000 is a massive amount of money. They always want to know if I kept all of it sitting in the bank, if I spent it on sports cars, if it felt like winning the lottery. I always tell them the truth. It absolutely did not feel like winning. It felt exactly like receiving a long overdue refund. The very first thing I did was pay off the remaining balance of my college student loans. These were the heavy loans I had been forced to take out because Wallace had maliciously drained my entire college fund to give to Maxine before I ever got to see a single dollar of it. Writing that final check to the bank felt incredibly right. It felt exactly like closing a painful, 17-year-old circle. Then, I scheduled a meeting. I sat down in a conference room with Darlene and my lawyer, Harlan, and we built something beautiful out of the ashes. We officially established the Estelle Mercer Foundation. It is a comprehensive scholarship and assistance fund specifically designed for young women who have lost their mothers early in life and are struggling to make it on their own. We do not just hand out checks for college tuition. The foundation covers the hidden costs of survival. We pay for professional licensing fees. We cover expensive certification costs. We provide the cash for first month's rent and security deposits. We fund the practical, everyday things that wealthy people completely ignore when they patronizingly tell poor kids to just work hard and you will be fine. I absolutely refused to name the foundation after myself. I proudly named it after the incredible woman who had the foresight to look 17 years into the dark future and construct a desperate plan to protect a young daughter she knew she would not live long enough to raise. Darlene eagerly handled all the initial legal setup. Harlan enthusiastically filed all the state paperwork free of charge. I fully funded the foundation with an entire third of the massive proceeds from the house sale. There was no flashy press release sent to the local newspaper. We did not host a lavish charity gala with rich donors. I did not make a single boasting post about it on social media. It was just a stack of legal forms, a dedicated bank account, and a fierce, personal mission. With the money that remained in my account, I went house hunting for myself. I finally bought a house. It is a small house. It only has 2 bedrooms. But it has a beautiful, wide front porch. Best of all, it has a large kitchen window that faces directly east, so the bright, warm morning sunlight pours into the room while I stand at the counter and drink my coffee. The legal deed to this house is strictly in my name. Only my name. The very first day I moved in, before I arranged the furniture or unpacked my clothes, I opened one specific cardboard box. Inside the box, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap, was the framed photograph of my mother. The photo where she is exactly 31 years old, holding me tightly in her arms, smiling brightly at the camera. I gently placed the frame on the prominent wooden shelf right beside my new front door. I wanted her face to be the very first thing I see when I walk into my home after a long day of work. I stood in the empty living room, surrounded by boxes, looked at her picture, and spoke out loud. This time, I said to the quiet room, I bought a house strictly for myself. 3 quiet months passed by. Maxine and Sterling somehow managed to stay together, despite the explosive revelation. I heard the latest updates through Nadine, who still had connections in their social sphere. Nadine told me that Sterling had rigorously enforced his strict terms. They were attending intense couples therapy every single week, with absolutely no exceptions allowed. Sterling had forced full financial disclosure. He knew about every hidden credit card account, every secret debt, every single dollar she spent. And, supposedly, they had a very long, very painful, brutally honest conversation about her toxic family history. All of it. No lies, no clever edits. Maxine had finally agreed to drop the act. Whether she actually followed through and changed her behavior, or if she was just faking it to keep his money, was honestly not my concern anymore. She did send me a letter. It arrived in my mailbox, handwritten on cheap notebook paper, which deeply surprised me. It was 2 pages long. The handwriting was frantic and incredibly messy. It looked like the kind of writing that comes from someone scribbling very fast because they are absolutely terrified they will lose their nerve before they reach the bottom of the page. She did not truly apologize. Not in any meaningful way. She wrote, "I know I completely messed everything up." She wrote, "I honestly do not know how to fix this situation." But the most telling part was at the very end. She wrote, "Sterling keeps asking me detailed questions about you, Jolene. He wants to know you. And the truth is, I do not know what to tell him, because I realize I do not actually know who you are anymore. And I guess that is entirely my fault." I sat on my new porch and read the messy letter twice. I carefully folded the 2 pieces of paper, walked inside, and placed the letter in the bottom drawer of my bedroom nightstand. I did not write a letter back to her. I did not call her. I did not ignore her because I hated her. I ignored her simply because I was not emotionally ready to engage with her. And for the very first time in my entire adult life, I allowed "not ready" to be a completely valid, full sentence. I did not owe her my immediate forgiveness just because she finally felt a little bit guilty. As for Wallace, he never reached out to me. There was absolutely no letter in the mail. There was no angry phone call. There were no pleading messages passed through distant relatives. There was just total, suffocating silence. It was the exact same crushing silence he had weaponized and used against me for my entire childhood. Except now, it was literally the only language the proud, broken man had left to speak. I did not sit by the window and wait for him to appear. I was completely done waiting. My life moved forward. Thursday nights quickly became the solid, happy anchor of my week. Darlene and I made a strict tradition of having dinner together every single Thursday. Sometimes we would cook at her cozy house. Sometimes she would come over to my new place. Most of the time, we went to the little Italian restaurant on Elm Street where the friendly owner knew our pasta orders completely by heart. Sometimes, Nadine would join us after work. Sometimes, my lawyer Harlan would even come along, bringing his lovely wife. We would sit at a large table, eating garlic bread and drinking red wine. We would talk loudly. We would laugh until our stomachs hurt about silly things that had absolutely nothing to do with Maxine, or Wallace, or the stolen colonial house on Maplecrest Drive. I looked around that crowded restaurant table one night and realized something profound. This was my real family now. It was not the broken family I was randomly born into by chance. It was the beautiful, loyal family I had actively built for myself. And the best part? Absolutely no one sitting at that Italian restaurant table ever demanded that I prove I was worthy of having a chair. They just pulled one out for me and poured me a glass of wine. I am standing outside on my wide front porch as I finish telling you this long story. It is a relatively small porch. It is just big enough to hold 2 comfortable rocking chairs and a large ceramic planter filled with flowers that I honestly keep forgetting to water. The small house sitting behind me is certainly nothing spectacular to look at. It will not win any architectural awards. But the legal deed sitting in the filing cabinet is entirely in my name. The monthly mortgage is paid on time. And absolutely nobody who has ever stepped foot inside this house has ever looked at me and told me I do not belong here. When I was a frightened 14-year-old girl standing in the wet grass at my mother's funeral, I truly used to believe that the word family meant constant, painful sacrifice. I believed that if I just gave enough of myself, if I gave enough money, if I offered enough endless patience, if I swallowed my pride and kept silent enough, the people who shared my biological blood would eventually turn around and see my true value. I was completely, fundamentally wrong. I was not wrong about the beautiful act of giving. I was just incredibly wrong about who I was giving my heart to. I did not call Harlan and instruct him to sell that massive house out of pure, vindictive anger. I sold it because, for the first time in 17 years, I finally, deeply believed that I was worth substantially more than just being a temporary guest in the spare bedroom of my own life. I realized that I absolutely deserved a permanent seat at the main table. Not simply because my hard-earned money bought the expensive mahogany table. I deserve a seat because I am a human being who intrinsically matters. If you are listening to this right now, and you are trapped in a family dynamic where you are constantly the one giving, and you are never the one receiving anything in return. If you are in a situation where your deep love and loyalty are treated like a cheap monthly subscription service that they can just casually cancel whenever it becomes slightly inconvenient for them to acknowledge you. Listen to me very carefully. You do absolutely not need their permission to stop. You do not need them to validate your pain. You do not need them to agree that you have been deeply hurt before you are finally allowed to start healing yourself. Setting a firm boundary is not building a brick wall to trap yourself. A boundary is a door. And you hold the only key. You alone get to decide who is allowed to walk through it, and who stays outside in the cold. I honestly do not know what happens next with my sister Maxine. Maybe one day, 5 or 10 years from now, I will finally feel ready to sit across a table from her, drink a cup of coffee, and just listen to what she has to say. Or maybe I will not. And that is completely allowed. I do not know what will happen regarding Wallace. I have completely stopped wasting my energy trying to predict the actions of a stubborn man who never bothered to learn how to truly see me. Maybe Darlene's harsh words planted a small seed of regret in his heart. Maybe they did not. That is entirely his heavy emotional work to do now. It is not mine. What I absolutely know for a fact is this. I am 31 years old. I have a safe, quiet home that belongs solely to me. I am surrounded by wonderful, loyal people who actively choose me every single day. I have my incredible mother's name proudly attached to a charitable foundation that actively provides funding for young girls who desperately remind me of who I used to be when I was 18. Girls who feel entirely alone, girls who are financially broke, but girls who refuse to be completely broken by the world. If you have ever been forced to make the impossible choice between keeping a toxic family and keeping your own soul intact, I want to hear your story. Please, tell me about it in the comments section below. I promise you, I will be reading them. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire, exhausting journey. If my story touched something deep inside you today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I am not asking just to boost numbers, but because maybe someone you know is currently struggling in silence, and they desperately need to hear this message, too. Please share this video with them. And if you are ready to hear another empowering story about a woman standing her ground, fighting back, and finally finding where she truly belongs, there is a link waiting for you right down in the description box. I will meet you over there in the next video. Take care of yourselves out there. And please, always remember this one crucial thing: you were never, ever too much for them to handle. They were simply offering you way too little.